California 6, Alabama. I keep expecting to find, actually I'm gonna stop looking through that list. I'm definitely gonna bring my glasses next time, because especially when this background goes over the white, it becomes hard for me to see it. Nevada, Mississippi keeps showing challenges. Mississippi has not really been on our radar, but look at this. Mississippi was, and the reason I guess it hasn't been on our radar is just a few weeks ago it was fine. It was at about 100, stable, and then it shot up to 300, and it's hanging out there. Showed a moment like it might recover, and then it's back up, and so Mississippi is maybe our latest wave, just a few weeks old. But if you look at Florida, which I would say is the exemplar of our previous wave. Actually, where is Mississippi? Maybe Mississippi does belong in Florida's wave. Kind of does, yeah, really the same time. So Florida, let's look at Texas too. Let's look at Georgia. How are these doing? And again, this is the severity graph, so this kind of combines how many cases there are, adjusted for population, with how quickly it's growing. So there's a hint here that Georgia might be starting to get better, but it's really not that clear. There's a hint that Mississippi may be getting better, not in the super short term, but in the medium term. And then Texas, not at all. Idaho actually has been showing up in my radar as well a lot, so let's take a look. Idaho has one of the worst graphs right now. It's hot at over 300 in severity, it's rising, and it doesn't show the slightest sense of getting better. So that's Idaho. Not looking so good. I'm going to reload my thing and see what this says. What does this say? It says, thanks for listening. Okay, someone here actually put something in the chat. It says I sound like a bot. Okay, I wonder if that just happened. Probably because my my internet was poor. Well, I'm back on a different internet now. I hope this one picks it up. And I hope that even if I sound like a bot, I'm intelligible. Alright, as usual, internet problems. Maybe I'm just going to have to wire myself in with Ethernet if this continues. But for now, here we are looking at Mississippi, Idaho, Georgia, Florida. I have no one listening right now to this podcast, or this live stream, which is kind of unfortunate. I think that it disconnected everyone, and maybe no one has figured out yet that it's back. Is it back? Does it say I'm live? This says I'm live. Yep, I think I'm live. Hope I'm live. Maybe not. Alright, I'm going to keep going. I'll go quickly, hoping that this recovered and that it'll all make it into the final video. I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time here, though, because I don't really know if this is going to make it into the final video, and anyway, I did one 2 days ago. So that's the broad news at the states level. We have quite a lot of states still looking pretty bad, but I think that some of the biggest news is that Arizona is showing a downward trend. A few of them are showing a downward trend, but several of them really aren't. Just to go over the hot spots right now in severity, I'll do that, and then I'll probably switch the counties. Working top down, we've got Arizona. Oh wow, I'm not going to be able to see this. Actually, I'm going to do something tricky here so that I can actually read these better against the background. The hot spots, I'm going to give myself a bunch of space on the right so it lines up better. That still isn't enough. I'll figure this out someday. Give myself a ton of space. So the hot spots are Arizona, Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, Nevada, Idaho, Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, California, I should look at California, and Utah. So we are seeing, in maybe half of those cases, we're seeing something that looks like a recovery. Now here it is again in Georgia. Looks a little bit like a recovery. Here it is again in Arkansas. But in about half of the cases, we're seeing what just looks like runaway growth still. Mississippi, I think, was okay, but let's see. If we look at the hot spots from this perspective, we have Arkansas not looking so good. We've got Nevada not looking so good. Um, Tennessee has not been on our radar. Tennessee is looking very bad right now in the severity. It's got a lot of cases and it's rising quickly, I guess. Let's actually take a moment and look and see whether it really is rising. Weekly growth by state. Tennessee. Okay, interesting. So in growth, Tennessee actually seems to have peaked and is falling off. So that's good for Tennessee, but in severity it's not, which suggests that the total daily cases per million must be rising. Let's look at Tennessee here. Okay, yeah, that's fair. So we're seeing a very high number of daily cases per million. This is a fairly hot spot, pushing 300, but at least the growth is dropping. And so Tennessee's not looking too bad, especially when you look at this. It seems like it's got a while to go to peak, a couple of weeks, but it does seem like it might get better pretty soon. I'm going to head back to my channel for a minute here and see if I'm streaming at all, because certainly the one that was running seems to have disappeared. I'm going to see if it tells me you're online. Live now. Great. So I'm going to have to go find the one I'm actually live on. Okay. Yeah, it looks like like when I lost my connection, it did recover, and I guess I had two people. Anyway, I've got people watching, so great. Looks like my stream's back up. Then I won't feel like I need to do anything. I don't need to shut this down. Let's just hop to hospitalizations by state. I haven't done much on hospitalizations, but I did put one of my fancy new graphs. I did hospitalizations for this graph in this format. And this shows a few weird ones that I'm just going to ignore. Plus, this might be real, Alabama, but it's so far above everyone else that I'm not sure what to make of it. So let's ignore that as well and say, who's worst in hospitalizations? Well, Georgia. This is hospitalizations per million, so it's a little bit like daily cases per million, but it's how many are in the hospital. So 20, Georgia's the worst, followed by South Carolina and Arizona, Alabama. Yeah, here again, I need my glasses. You can read them if I can't. Oklahoma, Mississippi. It's many of the usual suspects. Utah, the Gang of Six plus our latest batch are the ones that have the worst hospitalizations. And notice that most of them are rising. So I think that what we're seeing is something. Back when I first started this, I was expecting there to be a natural progression where people would get the disease, then they'd be hospitalized for the disease, then they'd die from the disease. You would expect it in that order. And I didn't do, I did death graphs for a while, and then I stopped because they always seem to very closely mirror the cases graphs, which is, you'd expect there to be a couple weeks lag. I'm now getting the sense that they're actually, that for whatever reason, probably better reporting, we are seeing that kind of lag. And so here we see that Georgia, which may be on the beginning to recover a little bit, as I recall. Let's look at the daily cases per million for Georgia for a minute. I'm probably going to have to start using my own legend here. There are so many graphs to hop quickly from one to another. Okay, maybe. But in any case, there's a definite swoop down here in Georgia in just recent days. But when you look at hospitalizations, that swoop is not here. It's just rising. And I think that we'll see the hospitalizations drop now that the cases are starting to drop in Georgia. And so let's look at Arizona, for instance. Arizona, similarly, hospitalizations are rising. And by the way, there are certain prominent personalities who are saying, don't look at cases, look at deaths, look at hospitalizations. Things aren't as bad as they look because hospital, because the cases are rising but the deaths are dropping, or cases are rising but the hospitalizations are dropping. Now, maybe that was true a couple weeks ago. I wasn't really tracking. I was just tracking cases, but it really doesn't seem to be the case today. You look at Florida, you look at, I hear people saying that hospitalizations are dropping in Florida, but that's not showing up in my data. COVIDtracking.com shows that Florida's hospitalizations are rising and have never been falling. So I don't understand that. Maybe they're not rising as fast as deaths, as cases. And by the way, here are deaths. I have a new graph for this as well. Let's look at Arizona. Let's look at Florida. Arizona and Florida. There is nothing good about these death graphs. These are extraordinary in how rapidly they're growing. So here's the deaths. Someone asked for, wrote a comment and said, let's analyze the deaths. And here they are, and they are looking terrible for Arizona. Now, I think that they will tend to lag by a week or two because there's the incubation period, and some people get their COVID detected very soon now because of testing, and then it takes them a while before they die, and it was well after that they are reported as a positive, well after the time they're reported as positive. So this is kind of a time capsule of a couple of weeks ago. Maybe this is what the graph of cases looked like a couple of weeks ago in Arizona. Now it's what the deaths are looking like. So I don't get it. This narrative that I keep hearing saying Florida's great, Arizona's great. And it's just that, and even the health minister or someone of Florida was saying, Florida doesn't have a problem, we're doing great. This was just yesterday or the day before. I saw a video of this person saying, Florida's doing fine. And they seem to be pointing to hospitalizations and deaths as evidence that Florida was doing fine. I'm just saying, I don't see that. Florida's not doing fine. Hospitalizations are rising, deaths are rising, unless my data source is wrong, and I haven't seen a sign of that. No, these are not doing fine. I expect we will see in days to come that these will start to look better because the number of cases appear to be peaking, especially in Arizona, but not yet. For now, I'm seeing exactly what I'd expect, which is to say when you have a spike of cases, a couple weeks later you'll have a spike of deaths. And we may have some better treatments, and so the correlation coefficient between those may be drifting apart where we won't see as many deaths per case. You know, the mortality rate may be dropping. Probably is, but it's still rising. Okay, briefly let's look at Georgia. We already have Georgia, don't we? No, we don't. Georgia also looking bad in hospitalizations. Let's look at California. I'm not sure we even looked at California in severity, but I'll tell you it's a little above 200. California continues to be moderate. It's not one of these really hard-hit states. Where is California? CAL. Where is California? I must just not have data for it. I remember this from before, and Texas also didn't have data. Okay, interesting. This graph just omits them when they don't have data, rather than doing what we did before, where they'd be flatlined at the bottom. So unfortunately, I don't have data for California on hospitalizations, but I do have data for deaths. And here again, we can see, now here you could have made this argument that California was rising, but deaths were falling slightly. Deaths were falling from 2 per million down to 1.5 per million. But whatever that was, that slight downward trend has now been lost 2 weeks later. So maybe this is when they were talking that way, and maybe the people who are still talking that way haven't looked at the data recently. But California has now begun to spike. Spike is too strong a term. Spike is overused. This is a spike, by the way. Arizona is spiking in deaths. California is rising in deaths. And Florida is somewhere in between. Georgia, also, having shown a trend downward, is now rising in deaths. And so what I think we're seeing here is the natural result of a disease which was rising rapidly a couple weeks ago, which arguably started to peak a couple weeks ago. But the natural effect of a rise a couple weeks ago, a sharp rise in the United States of an incurable disease, with fortunately a very low mortality rate. Nevertheless, no matter how low the mortality rate is, if it's constant, when the cases rise, the deaths will rise. And so, unless we're reducing that mortality rate, we're going to keep seeing this rise as long as cases rise. So, all right, there's just a lot to talk about here. I guess I'll show off my final graph briefly, which is another one of these new moving average graphs with, and by the way, just to say, I do have one of the other nice things about this graph is you can tell the lines apart. If you see this line, you say, oh, that's dotted yellow, and you can you know which one that is. And these other graphs, you just couldn't make that connection. Actually, I guess I don't know what that is. Wyoming? Yeah, these are distinguishable in theory, colors and styles. So you really can say, okay, that's solid orange or something, so it must be Maine. So, positive testing numbers. And by the way, most of the improvements I've made I've done to the states page. We don't have these improvements on the counties or pages in most cases like this, percent positive tests, only at the states. But the states has been my focus because that's actually, in some sense, where the action is. The counties are all terrible, the countries are pretty good. The interesting middle ground right now is states. So, 10% roughly is okay. If you can do less than 10%, you're doing okay in positive testing. There are some wild numbers up here. Puerto Rico claiming to test at 85%, that 85 out of every 100 tests are positive. That may even be true, but what that usually indicates is that the testing capacity is very limited. And so you only are testing people who you're pretty sure have the disease anyway. Wyoming, oddly, probably for similar reasons, was seeing testing above 60%, doing better now, but still, 10% is a good number. This is terrible. Wyoming is seeing extraordinarily high. Oklahoma as well, very high. Mississippi, very high. Arizona, let's zoom in on Arizona. The percent of positive tests, here we are seeing again just this, we often see this, where when where the testing seems to, the trajectory of the testing seems to follow the trajectory of the cases. So Arizona had a real problem. It still has a real problem, but it seems to be declining. And this is a very good sign that Arizona is getting over it, because they have not reduced their testing. In fact, they've increased their testing. I'm sure if we looked at their graph above, the one above this one, it would say Arizona is increasing their testing per capita, because everyone is. But they're seeing fewer and fewer tests come back positive. It's still 25%. Recall that 10% is marginally acceptable. So they still have a terribly high testing rate. And you see people waving signs saying, don't open the schools, we have 25% people testing positive. And we do. That's true. The signs are correct. But it's dropping. It seems to be dropping. A little bit of tail here saying maybe we're going upwards, but I'm guessing that's just a glitch, not a glitch, but a blip, some noise. We'll see. Maybe they're headed higher and higher and higher. But Arizona, in any case, is seeing an improved positive test ratio. So dropping for the past couple weeks. Probably going to keep doing that, given the trends, the trajectory we tend to see. And again, the trajectory we tend to see, let's just take a look at it for a moment. Let's look at New York, a great example. I'm going to use my own legend, because we've just got so many graphs here now. The trajectory of, say, New York, classic trajectory, rises for 30 days, falls for 30 days, never comes back. And we have at least 10 states that have shown that trajectory. Pennsylvania is probably not one of them, but like New Jersey did it, and Massachusetts did it, and the East did it, Illinois did it. Illinois may be showing some signs of coming back. Michigan, all these early states, Michigan did it on a very small scale. But we have this tendency to peak in 30 days and recover. And so now we look at Arizona, and it's doing arguably the same thing. It peaked higher than most, it peaked a little later than most. It certainly is our one of our worst states, Florida, but both Arizona and Florida are showing this sense of following that same trajectory. So back in 2 weeks ago when I said, well, I'm not going to make a prediction, but if they follow the trajectory of most states, they're going to peak around here, around the 30-day mark, and they're going to fall, and they're going to hit 100 around they go back to 100 around the 60-day mark, or maybe 70. So we can say, we don't know if that's going to happen, but we can say that many states have done that, and we can say that these two are continuing to indicate that they're on that trajectory. They haven't shown a clear example that they're not following that trajectory, and they've shown in a couple senses that they are. They've risen steadily, they peaked at 30, and now they're falling. So it's evidence points to that being a real thing that states do. And that's great if so, because these states are in big trouble, but at least if that's what happens, they can say it's only a month. It's a month until our cases are already falling, and it's a month until we are back into cool territory. All right, I really need to move on to counties. I'm over time, so that's the state news. The state news is actually kind of good, given how it's been. I mean, it's kind of terrible, and that almost all states. I heard somewhere today, 2 states it says are growing in cases, are not growing in cases. Now, I don't actually see that from here. It seems to me that there are actually a lot of states that arguably are no longer growing. But there certainly is a whole lot of this very strong upward trajectory. Well, yeah, even in total cases, it looks like Arizona and Florida are starting to head downwards. Anyway, and this is severity though, so it takes the growth rate into account. So maybe that's what it is. Anyway, there's still totally a pandemic ravaging the country. There are still a lot of states that are doing very terribly. My guess is that the reason that these are recovering is because people got scared, they went inside, and they put on their masks. And we can see that. I should make a graph of mask usage. I've seen some of them. I don't know that my data source shows it, but mask usage just keeps rising. And there is, I realize this is a very controversial topic, but I've tried to find the best data I can find about this, and there's still not really great data. But a month ago, I wouldn't have put huge money on the efficacy of masks, but at this point, I think the evidence is in. Not solid. Science is never done. It's still just a theory that masks help this. But I think the weight of evidence is that not only do masks help, but the masks are perhaps the reason that we get over this. And the growth rate of masks is the reason that we've peaked and dropped. That's my theory. And they'll keep doing the science, and I might be wrong about that, but I sure as heck am going to keep wearing a mask, because I think that's a very good theory about how the metaphorical immune system of a region functions. And by the way, if masks are the antibodies of the metaphorical immune system of a region, then the demasking of people as they get complacent is the falling away of the immune system. And that's where we'll see second waves. Is where right now in Florida, I think you're seeing a pretty high mask usage. We're certainly seeing it in California. Something like 90% of people, 80% of people always or sometimes wear masks. And once California gets over it and recovers, then we'll eventually see people, they'll stop wearing masks. But right now, look at California. It is not recovering. It is not as bad as anyone. This is where California always lives, in this place of things aren't very bad, but they're not bad compared to everyone else, but it's not good either. California is mediocre when it comes to its epidemic. It can't even raise a really grand epidemic. It's just got this mediocre epidemic that's it can only wish to be Florida, I guess. Anyway, that's the news at the state level. And I guess that also is the news at the state level. Look at those death numbers. So thank you whoever suggested that I do death numbers, because, wow, they're terrible. And I hope that 2 weeks from now we're going to see them follow the trajectory of cases that we've started to see in so many places. Let's look at death numbers overall, just as a brief glance. before we leave here. Deaths are looking, I'd say, flat or up in most places. We don't have a lot of recovery graphs around deaths. Okay, got to move on to the counties. Here we go to the counties of California. And I'm going to make this real quick because I'm already over my usual time. I have added a few of my new graphs here. I'm keeping the old ones. If you have an opinion, put a comment here or in the chat. Should I get rid of the blue graphs? Should I get rid of the new graphs? Should I keep them both? I'm finding cases, oh, this already screwed up, isn't it? Whatever. I'm finding places where, for one thing, the blue graphs get screwed up in this way. There should be dots here, and they just disappear. Sometimes when you load, the blue graphs are completely empty. The blue graphs have so many things on them when you count all the dots that I think that the web browsers just freak out sometimes. So that's an argument for getting rid of the blue graphs as well. But the blue graphs do give these nice, let's look at growth rates. They give the rope chart gives a sense that no one else can. Wow, holy cow, of how the trajectory of states are going. I wonder, that looks so good that I have to think it might be wrong. Oh darn, it is wrong. Yeah, see, there's this thing that happens sometimes where every single state shows a 0 for the latest day. I'm going to try to real quick hop over to my notebook here. You won't be able to see me do this, but it should take just a second for me to change one of my parameters so that I can regenerate these graphs and get better data. So the graphs right now are looking too good, but a single day of all zeros is not enough to totally wreck it. It just makes things look a little too good. And so, okay, I'm going to do this here. I'm going to skip the most recent day. I'm going to tell it to upload the graphs, and I'm going to run my notebook. Come on, run the notebook. Okay. So I'll start here talking about these counties, but just keep in mind that there is this one point here where every single state says it has 0 new cases. This will not much affect this, though. This graph, Los Angeles, as always, is the highest, followed by, it's interesting, it knows the dots are there. It's like pointing at them, but it just doesn't show them on the graph. Followed by Riverside, interesting. Riverside is our second worst. Orange County, San Diego, San Bernardino, and Imperial. All right, where am I in my generation of other graphs? Okay, I've got a race here going on where my graphs are regenerating in one window while I'm looking at them in the other. In terms of, I wonder if I can look at something like the tests while I'm doing this. Percent tested by county. Is that also all zeros? All right, I'm going to try to reload my graphs here. See if any of them have gotten better. If not, I might just call it a day. Oh, did it already do that? That was quick. All right, so good. Still lost its dots, though. I tell you, I am leaning towards getting rid of my blue graphs and replacing them all with these moving averages graphs. Maybe I'll just use a really long moving average, like 30-day moving average, to smooth out those lines so I get something like the simplicity of these graphs. Yeah, this also lost its dots. But we do have some, yeah, this is better. So I'm out of time. I'm going to just jump straight to severity, my fave, severity. Okay, who's the worst? Stanislaus is the worst. Stanislaus has done some weird stuff here. I don't know quite what happened here, but it was bad, sure. It was at a warm spot, pushing hot spot, and then suddenly it shot to 1,000, and we just don't see 1,000. I'm going to pour through the news and see if I can figure out what happened to Stanislaus, but it really got a bad case of it. Maybe recovering now. Evidence points to Stanislaus starting to recover, but yikes. Imperial, and again, this is a combination. This is the severity, so Imperial shows 100 at its peak, but certainly is doing better. Who's this? Orange, also starting to look a little better. San Joaquin, starting to look a little better. And the wow moment that I had when I first looked at the graphs, where I said this can't be right, was just the number of downward trajectories I was seeing. Even after correcting the data, I'm still seeing a lot of downward trajectories here. And so there's a sense that in the past week, and we got I think I hinted this a couple days ago, that the counties may be starting to do better. We're starting to see some recovery across, and they all have a lot of cases, but it must be their growth rates. I'm going to reload this page again, just to see. Did this work? See if I'm going to reload it just to make sure I'm not using old data here. But this is very interesting. Los Angeles is still doing quite poorly in the total graph, but other counties, not so bad. Okay, let's look at Los Angeles because it certainly is our dominant. I mean, there's nothing good about this graph. Daily cases per million is just rising and seems to be accelerating here. Let's look at Los Angeles in the growth rate. There's a bit of a snarl unless we look at a single one. But if we look at Los Angeles in growth rate, yeah, okay. I mean, 40 is a bad growth rate, weekly growth rate. 40 is sort of growth rate hotspot in some sense. But 20 is not great. Los Angeles, it's hovering around 20 or a little below. Not great, but not really awful either. But not recovering. Los Angeles is not recovering yet. And there's Stanislaus with its very high growth rate, but it is recovering. And so are all of these. Now, if we were to look at this in the rope chart, I think this is where I first had my wow moment. Okay, yeah, not quite so good now that I've taken out all those zeros, but still, look at all the counties that are trending downwards now in growth. It was just days ago that this chart showed every single line up and to the right. But now look at all the ones that are heading downward. This is the zero line. So we still have nearly every county, of the hottest counties at least. Let's look at by total county, by all the counties. Nearly every county is still growing. But look at all these downward ones. I'm not going to look into all of them individually, but look at all those counties that are, even in this very conservative growth rope chart, are showing a downward trend. So this is good news for California. Finally, I have some good news from California, which is to say, yes, we're still growing. Yes, all the counties are still growing. Yes, we're seeing more cases every day. But we finally have that critical first, there was a word that I kept saying, bellwether, but that wasn't the word. What I really want, what this is it's a leading, I think a leading metric, leading indicator. I'm going to look that up. Leading indicator, make sure I'm using that right. A leading indicator changes before the rest of the economy, for instance, goes in a particular direction. So the growth rate here, the downward trend of the growth rate, is a leading indicator of the recovery of the daily cases per million. We have a strong, sustained, half of the county is showing leading indicator that we are headed towards recovery in California. And we did not see that a week ago. And there were week after week where I just wrung my hands and said, there's nothing good here. Now we have something good here. A lot of counties are trending downwards. So whatever California did, if California did something, it's working. And I think what California did is it panicked. I keep saying this. California panicked, as it should, because we have a potentially lethal disease with no cure and infectious. And so what do when you have a potentially lethal disease that's infectious? You stay away from other people who might have it. Or because you might have it and might not even know it, you stay away from other people. And if you must go towards other people, you mask up so that the major transmission vector, which is airborne or maybe aerosol or droplets, can't get to them, and theirs can't get to you. This is my theory. But whatever happened, even if masks are completely ineffective, somehow California has recovered. Maybe the disease just follows its own trajectory, but really, I'm no longer seriously entertaining the idea that masks are ineffective. Masks appear to be effective. The science is really pointing that way. And also, fear is effective, whether masks are or not. I certainly, I haven't left the house twice this week. I think I've left the house less than usual. I would have been going to work every day. We don't do that anymore. And so we see this trend in California, which had a problem and still has a problem, but is finally heading towards recovery. So I'll leave it there. Good news for California, finally. Good news at the United States level. Pretty good news at the United States level. And worldwide, the news has broadly been good anyway. There just aren't a lot of really hard-hit countries. A lot of countries have recovered. We don't see Europe coming back. Europe is just done. We don't see Asia coming back. China freaks out when it gets 50 cases in Beijing, and then you never hear about it again because we have an immune system as a society to crack down on hotspots, tiny hotspots that show up in Beijing or wherever. And so it goes. And so I get tested every week, and so I wear a mask, and so I stay inside, and I'll leave only when I need to. And so everyone else does as well, and so we see the downward trend here and everywhere. And so the news, at last, is pretty good. I'm Greg Farrar. Thanks for watching.